5 plants grow on 5 continents that produce caffeine. They grow in buckets. No pesticides, no fertilizer, and no replanting. 3 contain more caffeine than coffee. 2 deliver 6 hours of energy without a crash. Indigenous peoples brewed them for millennia. A $450 billion industry buried their names. By the end of this video, you will know all 5 and how to harvest free caffeine from your porch forever. Caffeine is not coffee. Most people use those words like they mean the same thing. They do not. Caffeine is an alkaloid that appears naturally in over 60 plant species across every inhabited continent on Earth. Coffee is just one delivery method, one plant among dozens that produces this molecule. What makes coffee special is not the caffeine, it is the $450 billion marketing machine behind it. Here is what that machine does not tell you. When coffee beans are roasted at temperatures above 400 degrees, the process destroys compounds called polyphenols. These are natural buffers that slow caffeine absorption in your stomach. Raw coffee beans contain them, roasting burns them away. So when you drink a cup of coffee, the caffeine hits your bloodstream fast. Your heart rate spikes. Your energy surges for about 90 minutes, then it crashes and you reach for another cup. That cycle repeats 3 or 4 times a day for most adults. That craving is not a flaw in the system. That craving is the system. Walk into any office break room in America at 2 in the afternoon. Watch what happens. Half the room is standing around the coffee maker with glazed eyes and heavy shoulders, pouring their 3rd or 4th cup because the morning dose wore off hours ago. They are not drinking because they enjoy it. They are drinking because the crash forced them back. Nobody questions this. Nobody asks why the most popular stimulant on Earth stops working every 90 minutes. They just refill the mug. Now consider something remarkable. On 5 separate continents, completely independently, indigenous cultures discovered the same principle. Caffeine works better when paired with other compounds that occur naturally in the same leaf. A molecule called theobromine gently stimulates the cardiovascular system. Another called theophylline relaxes smooth muscle. An amino acid called L-theanine calms the nervous system without causing drowsiness. When these compounds ride alongside caffeine, they slow absorption, they extend the stimulation, they prevent the crash. No laboratory designed this. No pharmaceutical company patented it. The plants did it themselves over millions of years of evolution. 3 of the 5 plants I am about to reveal belong to a single botanical family. They are all holly trees. They grow wild across the Americas. Indigenous peoples brewed them for thousands of years. The modern caffeine economy pretends they do not exist. Add 2 more species from Asia and Central America, and you have 5 plants that grow in containers, cost nothing to maintain, and deliver cleaner energy than anything you can buy at a coffee shop. Deep in the Ecuadorian Amazon, there is a tree that indigenous families have gathered around every morning before sunrise for at least 2,000 years. The Quechua people of the upper Amazon basin wake in total darkness. They light a communal fire in the center of the shelter. They fill gourds with hot tea brewed from the long green leaves of a tall evergreen tree growing beneath the jungle canopy. And then they sit together and share their dreams. This is not casual consumption. This is social infrastructure built around a plant. The Quechua call this tree the night watchman. Hunters who drank it before overnight watches reported calm, sustained alertness lasting for hours without fatigue. They could sit motionless in the dark rainforest waiting for prey and never lose focus, not for minutes, for hours. The tree is Guayusa, an evergreen holly native to the upper Amazon, growing along river tributaries in Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia. Under the right conditions, it reaches nearly 100 feet tall and lives for over a century. Its leaves contain caffeine at concentrations between 1.9% and 7.6% by dry weight. Arabica coffee beans contain about 1.4%. At its peak, a single Guayusa leaf holds more than 5 times the caffeine of a coffee bean. No other leaf on Earth comes close. But caffeine alone does not explain why the Quichua chose this tree over dozens of other options in the most biodiverse forest on the planet. Guayusa leaves also contain L-theanine, theobromine, and a dense concentration of polyphenols and flavonoids. These compounds modulate the caffeine delivery. The result is a slow onset of energy that builds over 30 minutes and holds steady for 4 to 6 hours. No jitters, no crash, no second cup needed. Coffee gives you caffeine. Guayusa gives you the full compound stack. The Quichua figured this out 2 millennia before modern pharmacology existed. There's another property of this plant that Western science still cannot fully explain. The Quichua developed a specific ritual around it. They drink several cups before dawn and then return to sleep for about an hour. During that hour, they report vivid dreams they can consciously direct. The kind of dreaming where you know you are asleep and can steer the experience. They wake up, gather around the fire again, and share what they saw. Dreams are interpreted as a community. Hunting routes are chosen. Sick members are treated based on what appeared in the dream state. One plant that keeps you alert when awake and sharpens your consciousness when asleep. Coffee does not do that. In a container, Guayusa stays manageable. If you live in a warm climate or can bring a pot indoors during winter, this tree grows on a patio. One tree, properly maintained, produces harvestable leaves for decades. Pick the leaves, dry them in shade, steep in hot water. That is the entire process. The same process the Quichua have used since before the Roman Empire existed. If you live in zones 9 through 11 in the United States, Guayusa can stay outdoors year-round. Think southern Florida, coastal Texas, parts of Southern California. Anywhere else, treat it like a tropical houseplant. Bring it inside once nighttime temperatures drop below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. A large rolling planter makes this easy. Push it out in May, pull it back in October. The tree does not mind the transition as long as you give it bright, indirect light near a south-facing window during winter. Now there is a holly bush growing wild from the sandy coastal plains of Texas to the tidewater marshes of Virginia. It grows in ditches and along fence lines and in the decorative hedges of suburban shopping centers. It tolerates drought, salt spray, and hurricanes. Deer will not touch it. Landscaping crews trim it into neat topiaries outside banks and restaurants every week across the American Southeast. Millions of people walk past it on their way to buy coffee every morning. It is the only plant native to North America that contains caffeine. You may have it in your yard right now. You might be mowing around a source of free caffeine every Saturday morning, and you do not even know it. This plant is Yaupon holly. Its history is one of the most deliberate acts of botanical sabotage ever recorded. Indigenous peoples of the southeastern woodlands brewed Yaupon for at least 8,000 years. That is roughly 3,000 years longer than Chinese tea has existed. The Timucua people of what is now Florida considered it sacred, a gift from their god of purity. The Cherokee used it. The Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Muskogee, the Caddo, the Chitimaca. Tribes across the entire Southeast processed Yaupon leaves into a dark caffeinated beverage that was traded along networks stretching from the Gulf Coast to the interior plains. This was the most widely consumed stimulant in pre-contact North America, not coffee, not imported tea. A holly bush growing wild in sandy soil along the coastal plain was the source of daily stimulation for many communities. European colonists who arrived in the 16th and 17th centuries documented its use extensively. Some of them liked it. Some started exporting it back to England. That is when the trouble began. In 1789, a British botanist named William Ayton worked as the royal gardener at Kew Gardens in London. He was responsible for classifying plants from across the British Empire. That year, he assigned Yaupon holly a new scientific name, Ilex vomitoria, the holly that makes you vomit. It was a lie. Yaupon tea is not emetic. There are centuries of historical records documenting casual daily consumption with no mention of nausea. The ceremonial version was sometimes brewed at extreme concentration and consumed rapidly to induce ritual purging, but the everyday tea caused no such reaction. Yaupon took an extreme edge case from indigenous ceremony and branded it as the defining trait of the entire species. Botanists at the University of Florida believe this was not accidental. They believe Yaupon was acting in the interest of the British East India Company, which at that time held a stranglehold on the global tea and coffee trade. A free caffeinated plant growing wild across the American colonies was a direct threat to colonial revenue. Tea and sugar taxation was a pillar of the British economy. One Latin name, strategically chosen, was enough to destroy consumer interest for centuries, and the effect persists. Researchers surveyed 75 people about their willingness to try a Yaupon beverage. 12 expressed interest. When those same people learned the plant's scientific name, interest dropped nearly in half. A single word assigned in 1789 is still killing demand 2 centuries later. That is the longest-running smear campaign in the history of food. Here is what that campaign buried. Yaupon has the highest ratio of theobromine to caffeine of any caffeinated plant ever tested. The theobromine provides smooth alertness without jitters or anxiety. Yaupon also contains almost no tannins. Tannins are the compounds in coffee and regular tea that cause bitterness, stain your teeth, and upset your stomach. You can steep Yaupon leaves for an hour and the tea will not turn bitter. Try that with the coffee sitting on your counter right now. Growing it is almost absurdly simple. It is native to the American Southeast, already adapted to the soil, the climate, and the pests. Plant it in a container or in the ground. Grab a stem near the base and slide your hand outward and the leaves strip off clean. Dry them on a screen in the shade. Roast them lightly in a pan for darker flavor. Steep in hot water. This is free caffeine from a plant a British gardener tried to erase with a fake name 236 years ago. Yaupon is finally starting to get the recognition it deserves. Small roasters in Savannah, Georgia and Austin, Texas are now selling Yaupon tea in local markets and online. They harvest it from wild stands and private land across the coastal South. The flavor is mild, earthy, slightly sweet, nothing like what that Latin name would suggest. If you see it at a farmer's market, buy a bag and taste what 8,000 years of indigenous knowledge produced, then go home and plant your own so you never have to buy it again. Every cup of real tea you have ever consumed in your life came from one species. Green tea, black tea, white tea, oolong, all of them. One species, Camellia sinensis. The global tea industry spent decades making this seem exotic, requiring vast plantations in the mountains of Sri Lanka or the highlands of Fujian province. But Camellia sinensis is a camellia. Americans grow ornamental camellias in their yards across the entire South. The tea plant belongs to the same genus. It is the same kind of shrub, and it grows beautifully in a container. An 18-inch pot with acidic soil and partial shade, that is all it needs. It is a naturally compact shrub that reaches about 6 feet at most in a pot and can be easily pruned shorter. A single plant produces multiple rounds of new leaf growth across a growing season. That is enough to supply a household with real homegrown tea for the entire year. The versatility of Camellia sinensis is what makes it unique among the 5. The same leaf produces vastly different caffeine levels depending solely on how you process it after picking. White tea delivers about 35 milligrams per cup, green tea around 50, oolong about 75, black tea the highest at roughly 90 milligrams. You control the caffeine by controlling the oxidation, you pick the leaves, you decide what happens next. Coffee prices surged over 70% in 2025. Shoppers stood in grocery store aisles staring at $12 bags of ground coffee that cost $7 just 6 months earlier. Harvests were disrupted by climate instability in Brazil and Vietnam. Shipping delays stacked up at ports worldwide. Meanwhile, a single tea plant in a terracotta pot on your back porch produces free tea for decades. No supply chain disruptions, no commodity traders, no middlemen. In Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and southern Brazil, there is a drink woven so deeply into daily life that it functions more like a handshake than a beverage. Groups of friends pass a single gourd filled with dried leaves and hot water from person to person. They do this in parks, on construction sites, and between university classes. Each person drinks through a metal straw, refills the gourd with hot water, and passes it along. On Sunday afternoons in Buenos Aires, families do this in public parks along the river while the sun drops behind the skyline. The plant is Yerba mate. Another holly, Ilex paraguariensis, the indigenous Guarani people of what is now Paraguay, cultivated it long before European contact. When Spanish Jesuit missionaries arrived in the 17th century, they recognized its commercial value immediately and tried to monopolize production. They built mate plantations across their mission territories. The plant proved impossible to control. It spread through indigenous trade networks faster than any colonial administration could contain. Yerba mate is the only one of the 5 that survived colonialism with its cultural identity fully intact. The Jesuits tried. They failed. The plant outlasted the empire. A typical cup contains approximately 80 milligrams of caffeine, comparable to coffee. But mate also contains theobromine at meaningful concentrations and trace amounts of theophylline. These 3 compounds together produce a sustained plateau of alertness, not a spike and crash. A slow build that holds for hours and fades gently. The kind of energy where you look up and realize 3 hours have passed and you never once felt the edge wear off. It grows as a shrub when pruned and adapts well to container growing in temperate climates. 3 continents, 3 holly trees, all caffeinated, all ignored in North America, while the coffee aisle in your grocery store gets longer every single year. The 5th plant has a name that translates to food of the gods, Theobroma cacao. For 3,000 years, the civilizations of Mesoamerica consumed cacao not as candy, but as a bitter stimulant drink, consumed before battle and trade journeys. The Aztecs, the Maya, the Olmec before them. No sugar, no milk, no foil wrapper. Cacao was ground into paste, mixed with water and chili peppers, and drunk by warriors walking hundreds of miles through Central American jungles. The dominant stimulant in cacao is not caffeine, it is theobromine, a vasodilator that stimulates the cardiovascular system rather than the central nervous system. The energy feels different from anything caffeine produces. Warmth in the chest, not electricity in the skull. Cacao beans contain 6 to 10 times as much theobromine as caffeine. This ratio means the small amount of caffeine present is completely modulated by the theobromine, creating an energy experience unlike coffee or tea. The modern chocolate industry took the cacao bean, stripped out the stimulant compounds during heavy processing, loaded it with sugar and dairy fat, and sold the world a candy bar. The original product was a functional stimulant used by the most powerful civilizations in the Western Hemisphere. They turned it into dessert and buried the original purpose underneath. If you want the real experience, skip the grocery store chocolate aisle entirely. Buy raw cacao nibs or ceremonial-grade cacao paste from a reputable source. Or better yet, grow a cacao tree indoors. It needs warmth, humidity, and patience. But when the pods finally ripen and split open, revealing rows of white pulp-covered beans, you are holding the same raw material that built trade empires across Central America 1,000 years before Columbus ever left Spain. Now let us talk about money, because that is what all of this is really about. The global coffee market generated $485 billion in revenue in 2025. 66% of American adults drink coffee every single day. That is the highest daily consumption rate in 20 years. Lines stretching out the door of every coffee shop in every city in the country. Drive-through lanes backed up onto the highway at 7:15 every weekday morning. Think about what that business model requires. It requires you to buy coffee every single day, beans you cannot grow in your climate, from plants you do not own, processed in roasting facilities you will never see. shipped across oceans on container vessels burning bunker fuel, stored in grain warehouses, distributed through supply chains with dozens of intermediaries, each one taking a margin, each one adding cost, each one standing between you and a molecule that grows on trees. Now think about what these 5 plants represent to that $485 billion model. Plant a Yaupon holly once. It produces caffeinated leaves for decades. No replanting, no fertilizer, no pesticides, no importation, no roasting facility, no subscription. A single planting becomes a permanent caffeine source. A permanent source generates zero recurring revenue. Zero recurring revenue attracts zero corporate investment. Zero corporate investment means zero marketing budget. Zero marketing budget means zero shelf space in your grocery store. And zero shelf space means 3 generations of Americans grow up believing the only way to get caffeine is to hand money to someone else every morning. This is not conspiracy. This is economics. Search any scientific database for coffee studies. You will find thousands of papers, billions in industry-funded research. Corporations sponsor studies that support their products. Universities compete for agricultural grants tied to coffee production. Search for Yaupon holly research. A handful of papers. Search for Guayusa pharmacology. Almost nothing from Western institutions. Researchers at Texas A&M found Yaupon extract contained significant antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, a promising result. Almost nobody followed up. The plants that grow themselves for free were deemed economically worthless because they could not generate shareholder value. And then there is the naming. One Latin word assigned by a British gardener in 1789 cut consumer interest in Yaupon nearly in half for over 2 centuries. Not a law, not a regulation, not a tariff, a word, and it worked better than any trade embargo in the history of commerce. Look at what happened to coffee just in the last 12 months. 70% price surge. Climate instability hammering harvests in Brazil and Vietnam, shipping delays at every major port, commodity speculators driving futures prices to 20-year highs, shoppers watching the number on the shelf tag climb month after month on bags of ground coffee that used to be affordable. Meanwhile, 5 plants grow within walking distance of most homes in America. 3 are hollies that thrive in poor soil and drought. 1 is the same genus as the ornamental camellias growing in millions of southern yards right now. 1 was deliberately given a revolting name to protect a colonial trade monopoly, and all 5 have been producing free caffeine since before recorded history. Here is what a 5-bucket porch setup looks like. 1 container with Yaupon holly, the easiest of the 5, the most cold-hardy, the most forgiving. Sandy soil, partial sun, occasional water. Harvest leaves anytime the plant is growing. Grab a stem near the base and slide your hand outward. The leaves strip right off. Dry them on a screen in the shade for a few days. Roast on a baking sheet at low heat for 20 minutes if you want a darker, richer flavor. Steep in hot water for 5 to 10 minutes. Free caffeine. 1 container with Camellia sinensis, 20-gallon pot with acidic soil, the same mix you would use for blueberries or azaleas. Partial shade. Harvest the top 2 leaves and the bud from each stem. For green tea, steam the leaves immediately after picking to halt oxidation. For black tea, let them wilt overnight, roll them between your palms to bruise the cells, let them oxidize until they darken, then dry with low heat. Same plant. Different tea, your choice. 1 container with Yerba mate, partial shade, rich soil, regular water, slower growing but equally tough once established. Harvest branches, dry the leaves over low gentle heat, crush them coarsely, add hot water just below boiling. In Buenos Aires, they refill the same gourd dozens of times throughout the day. 1 harvest lasts for weeks. 1 container with Guayusa if your climate is warm enough, or if you can bring the pot indoors when cold weather comes. This is the strongest caffeine source of the 5. Pick the mature dark green leaves, dry them in shade, steep in hot water just off the boil. The Quichua of Ecuador have done exactly this every morning for 2,000 years. The whole process takes 5 minutes, and 1 container with a cacao tree if you want the challenge. This one demands warmth and humidity year-round. It is the most demanding of the 5. But a mature tree in a large indoor pot produces enough pods for a household to process into raw cacao. Ferment the white pulp-covered beans for a week. Dry them in the sun, roast at low temperature, grind into a dark, bitter paste, stir into hot water. This is what Aztec warriors drank before marching to war, not a candy bar. A raw, powerful drink. 5 containers on a south-facing porch or patio, 5 plants, 5 sources of caffeine. Total startup cost less than what most people spend at coffee shops in a single month. No supply chain, no subscription, no commodity exchange, no import tariffs, no roasting facilities, no packaging lines, no shipping containers crossing the ocean, no barista, no markup. The average American spends over $1,200 a year on coffee. That is not a guess. That is the math on 2 cups a day at current prices. Over 10 years, that number becomes $12,000. Over a working lifetime, it approaches $50,000. $50,000 on a molecule that 5 plants in 5 buckets produce for free every single growing season without being asked. These 5 plants do not care about quarterly earnings. They do not care about futures markets or trade disputes or shipping lane disruptions. They grow in buckets on porches in Alabama and Oregon and Buenos Aires and Quito and Chiang Mai. They grew before the British East India Company existed. They grew before the first coffee bean was roasted. They grew before anyone figured out you could charge $4 for hot water poured over imported seeds. They grow whether you buy them or not. They have always grown. The only question is whether you will stop paying for what is already free. Oh, and if longevity fascinates you, my friend runs a channel called The Centenarian's Garden, all about blue zone secrets and what actually helps people live past 100. Go check them out. You will not regret it.